Gonzalo Celorio Moriata. I'll continue in English because otherwise I'm confused by French and Spanish and all at once. I will say this, I have a bilingual brain, as probably everyone in this room does. And so I don't know what the monolingual brain looks like. I have a hard time when I'm talking to monolingual audiences to determine if I'm reaching them, because there are a lot of voices in my head at any given time. I should have said that. I should have said that.
All the time. They're all monolingual.
To who? Politicians. Actually, about 40% of our Congress is bilingual.
Really?
Yep. 40%. Yep, 40% that admit to being bilingual. So, but that's a talk for another time. It's not about. So this is Gonzalo Celorio Moriata, who's the CEO of CM Idiomas, a language company in Mexico City. He is also the executive director of the Fundación Italia Moriata and is representing here the Colegio Mexicano de Intérpretes de Conferencias.
I have my notes in this computer. This one here, so I don't know how I'm going to manage my bilingual brain, but two computers is more than I can handle. So I'm going to talk about indigenous languages in Mexico and how indigenous interpreters and translators in Mexico really work on an uneven ground. Yes, I am a fit member because I am a member of the Colegio Mexicano de Intérpretes de Conferencias. Told you. And we don't have any indigenous language interpreters or translators. And that's probably because it's an association of conference interpreters, and there are not many conference interpreters that work with indigenous languages. So I'm actually part of the Committee of Regulations, and we are trying to see how we go around that, to be able to accept indigenous interpreters into our association. This is a long process. It's any association. We have to give a proposal, and then the General Assembly will accept it or not. But it involves kind of rethinking our whole structure to do this. But at the same time, what we want to do is train indigenous language interpreters to become conference interpreters at the same time. So also the Colegio de Intérpretes was one of the advisor organizations in the 2017 survey study on translation interpretation that the Fundación Italia Moriata that I chair did along with NorthAmerica in Mexico, and that's very much what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, Mexican languages, the Mexican language landscape. In Mexico, we have 68 languages with 364 variants. So that is over 130,000 language combinations. So it is practically impossible. And I might be corrected here, but well, or not, but the Zapotec, one Zapotec kind of language will not be able, one variant will not be able to communicate with another variant. So this happens with Imagine, the Zapotec, the Mixtec. So we really are talking about the same difference that we have between French and Catalonian. So there are no communication, there's no communication between these languages. So for practical effects, we are talking about 364 different languages. Yet Mexico is the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. 7.4 million are indigenous language speakers. That's 7% of the total population. And only 1.1 is monolingual. Spanish is one of the 4 dominant languages in the continent, as you know, and it is the most spoken international language in the world, and by native speakers. And by international language is a language that goes beyond borders. We speak it in 22 different, you can cross nearly the whole continent without changing languages, which is nearly unheard of. And 1 out of 4 Spanish speakers, native Spanish speakers in the world is Mexican. So in other words, we have 68 language switches with 364 variants spoken by 1.1 million people that are immersed in an extremely Spanish-heavy environment, both all political, economically, educationally, in a world of 120 million Mexicans. I was actually very surprised when you said a few minutes ago when we were on the elevator that you consider yourself Zapotec and not Mexican. And I actually think that the only unity that we have as Mexicans is Spanish, which is very interesting. So it is interesting. So the 2017 survey study on translation and interpretation in Mexico. We were aiming for 370 respondents, which was what we were told by statisticians that was a statistically significant sample. I have no idea how they got to their number. They explained to me a million times. I never understood it. I just believed them. We got 1,078, so nearly three times as many. And surprisingly enough, we got 30% of those were indigenous language participants. We did this by going through all the organizations, getting all the universities, all the schools, and getting people to participate in the study. But most importantly, we worked with a lot of volunteers who actually went to the field in different states to get information from translators and interpreters in the different states in indigenous languages and over the phone. And these volunteers were mainly translation and interpretation students who worked tirelessly to get this done. Okay, so one of the things, I'm going to show you some of the results, which are interesting. On the left side, you have the source languages, and this is on translation. And on the right, you have the target languages. 9 of the 16 top source languages that came up in the survey are indigenous. Nahuatl and Maya come before an important foreign language. Okay, and again, we talk about Mayan or Nahuatl as a whole and not each one of the variants. Nahuatl, Maya, and Quetzal are the 3 languages out of 7 target languages that were reported as the top languages that are indigenous and that come before a major European language or foreign language Italian. What was also interesting is that knowledge is transferred from indigenous languages into Spanish, but not vice versa, meaning that only a small portion of Spanish-written content is shared into indigenous languages. So this has an important implications in terms of accessibility and education, and also in sense of indigenous communities speaking to each other, because they cannot speak to each other. As I said, it's 130,000 language combinations if it's not through Spanish. We didn't find any single combination between one indigenous language and another. So Spanish is the only bridge. And the number of translators in all of the indigenous languages is roughly half of the number of the participants of the English-Spanish. So English-Spanish is still the biggest combination in Mexico. And this is very much the same in interpretation. Again, left is the source language, right is the target language. And 8 of the top 14 source languages that came up in the survey are indigenous. Nahuatl and Maya come before any important foreign language, that's from being French. 3 out of 8 target languages are indigenous, and Nahuatl and Maya come before the major foreign language, which is French, not considering English, obviously, which is the most important.
Is there an order? Is there a reason for the order?
Yeah, from more to fewer.
From more to fewer on the left?
Okay, so
right?
Spanish is the largest source language, and it's also the largest target language.
Okay, thank you.
Educational level and training. Here we found some interesting things as well. It was actually a very pleasant surprise that nearly 3/4 of interpreters and translators working with indigenous languages have a university degree or higher. This is higher than the national median. This is the national levels. So this is actually very interesting. It's still, it was much higher than we expected, but it's still lower compared to the 91% of interpreters and translators working with foreign languages with a university degree or higher. And by a university degree, I mean a university degree. I don't mean a university degree of translation or interpretation. Okay? It could be on sociology, anthropology, philosophy, whatever. Training in translation. And this is just training in not general studies, but in translation specifically. And the only group where there are the same number of translators with formal training in translation and without it is between 56 and 60. So people are not being trained. Most of the younger translators have no training in translation at all. We're not training our new generations of indigenous language translators, but the youngest generations of translators working in foreign languages are receiving specialized training. So that has changed. It's amazing how people in their 50s did get training and people who are younger and not being trained. Both in foreign languages and indigenous languages, most of the people in the older generations have received some sort of formal training in translation, and the percentage of translators who have received formal training is lower the younger they are. The chances in the younger generations of translators working in foreign languages, that changes, sorry, in the younger generations of translators working with foreign languages, but not in the younger generations of translators working with indigenous languages. And in interpretation, it's not very different. If we were worried about the lack of training among translators, we should be even more worried about the lack of training amongst interpreters. Most interpreters have not received any formal training in interpretation, but this is particularly worrisome in the younger generations of interpreters working in indigenous languages, where only 6% have actually had any training in the field.
By training, you mean official university training?
No, we mean more than 120 hours. A diploma course, which is in Mexico standards, a diploma course is 120 hours.
So do they, the ones who did receive training, especially in translation, did they receive training in translation into Spanish, out of Spanish, and also do an indigenous language?
No, most people who work with, there's like two completely different groups. There's very few people who would work from Spanish into a foreign language or vice versa, and very few that would also work with indigenous languages. So indigenous languages would be bilingual with Spanish. They would not be bilingual with any other language. Not with another indigenous language. They would be bilingual only with Spanish. And there is a lot of interpreters and translators who work with foreign languages that would have 2 or 3 language combinations, none of them being indigenous. What is interesting is the certification requirements. There's no training, but people are expected to be certified. More indigenous language interpreters are asked for medical interpreter certification than foreign language interpreters. So there is no availability for courses. There's no offer of training courses, but they are required to be certified.
Can you say who is offering the certification?
Mostly INALI, which is the National Institute of Indigenous Languages, the Ministry of Education, and the courts. The judicial system has the peritos, which are the certified translators.
Do they get members?
Sorry?
Do they get members?
They get a,
If the criteria is formal training and there is no formal training, so how do they get members?
what they do is they have to pass an exam.
Ah.
They have to sit an exam and pass it in the courts. So that doesn't mean that they were trained for it, and it doesn't mean that whoever tests them knows indigenous language.
Exam in lieu of training.
Exactly. Yeah.
Would you explain also like how these interpreters get that 20-hour training, 120 hours? They go back to rural Oaxaca. They're never called. And the day they get called, they've forgotten everything they've learned in that.
Absolutely. That's true. That's true. It's not something that's something I can only talk about from what I've heard. It was not actually part of the study. But yes, we've heard that a lot of interpreters who belong to the database, or the national database of certified interpreters, that have had the 120-hour course, and then they go back to wherever they come from, and they are never called again. Or when they are, they're expected to pay for their own travels to attend a hearing. Services. I told you I wasn't good at managing this two computers at the same time. Okay, so these are the most common the services that translators of indigenous languages are required, and both in indigenous languages and in, can you see the colors?
Yeah, that's foreign language.
Okay, so I mean, what are the most common requirements in indigenous languages, and what are the most common in foreign languages? And that comes with in translation. In interpretation, again, what I was talking about, only 60% of indigenous interpreters do conference interpreting, which is what the Colegio Mexicano is trying to deal with. How do we accept people if they are not conference interpreters? Do we change the name of our association? Do we train them on conference interpreting? Is there a need for conference interpreting? Or isn't there? What would that imply?
Do you have a subcategory?
Sorry, no, we don't. That's one of the possibilities that we're looking into.
But the need is for conference level skills in other venues. That's the need. The need is simultaneous skills, team interpreting skills in the community. I
Right,
mean, that's what the feels like. We don't even have definitions for this stuff yet.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, and again, what we want to do is we want to get to the interpreters that have been doing community interpreting and kind of prepare them into some sort of training on simultaneous and taking relay, things like this, which is something that I'll talk to you about in a second as well. And the next one is income.
Gotta go one more, I think.
One more. Okay, the majority of indigenous language interpreters don't make any money at all, which is amazing compared to foreign language interpreters. Only 0 to 30% of their income comes out of translation and comes to the foreign language translators, so the majority get their income from translation from what they do. So most of the indigenous language interpreters need to find other resources or other sources of work. In interpretation, it's very much the same. And this is important, and that the income from interpreting is much higher in foreign languages. But the next one is what is really impressive, which is the daily income. So 1,000 Mexican pesos is $50 US. So even if the category says from 0 to 100, that does not mean that they make 1,000 pesos. They are usually making nothing at all as translators and interpreters of indigenous languages. So those who practice this profession do not make their living exclusively from interpretation or translation at all. They complement their income with whatever they can. And the number of interpreters and translators of indigenous languages who work unpaid is very high, especially amongst interpreters. It's kind of community service. You have somebody from your community who needs help, and you go and you do it. So In addition, the communication, both for interpreting and translation, is Spanish-speaking oriented, and that's the only possibility, because it is impossible to attempt to have communication between 365 languages otherwise. And interpretation and translation do not exist between indigenous languages. There is a high educational level. There is seriously low interpreting or translation-specific training. There are unreasonable certification requirements, particularly for indigenous languages. Translations, the same trends, there's similar communication needs. There's in the same fields, particularly in translation. Interpreting is heavily community-oriented, like access to basic rights, health, education, justice, information, and the income is alarmingly low. That's more or less what we found. What we've done about it is that we organized a Lenguas conference, which tries to put under the same roof indigenous interpreters and translators and foreign language interpreters and translators. And what we try to do is that there is a communication between them, and that conference interpreters realize what it is like to work without the protection of the booth, and that there is a communication. We've been very successful. We've run this for 2 years. It's a big, long plenary session. We worked with NorthAmerica to organize this conference. The first one was in 2018. The second one was in January this year. And we're not doing a big conference like that until 2021, where we have a plenary session where indigenous interpreters and translators meet with those who work with foreign languages. And then there's 3 days of very heavy loaded workshops, short workshops, 2.5 hours, where again, our aim, even if we have some workshops that are particularly focused on indigenous languages, what our aim is that we can bring a level where we don't have to differentiate. I think that the best way of reaching the inequality is by treating interpreters of foreign languages and interpreters of indigenous languages the same, and having them in the same workshops, in the same rooms, doing exactly the same sort of activities. So what we decided is that as we're not doing a 2020 Lenguas forum, which is for 500 people, what we did is that we are organizing what we in the organizing committee called Lenguitas. But they decided that was not a proper name, so it's called the Lenguas Challenge. And we have 5 workshops for 15 students each. And this is from practitioners to practitioners. There are a lot of conferences in Mexico that are academic, and we really want this to be from practitioners to practitioners. So we have one on simultaneous interpretation, and we will have an indigenous interpreter there. We have one on community interpreting, and that has 2 branches, one for Spanish, English, English, Spanish, and then the other one for indigenous languages. And there are some sessions where they will work together, particularly working with relay and other things. We have one on translation. We also found in the study, and it's not here, I mean, the study has 100 pages and it's enormous. We also have, we found out that most translators in Mexico work bidirectionally in the first, second, and third language combination. So what we did is we organized this workshop where we will be working into Spanish and into English, from Spanish and from English, both ways, to kind of bridge to kind of find the right balance between a literal translation and a translation that flows in the target language. And the other one is project managers for LSP. So these are 20 hours, 3 days in Cuernavaca, very intensive, and that's what we will be doing in different states of Mexico. Every year that is an even year, and every uneven year we will do the forum.
Wow.
So that's it. So I don't know if you have any questions. Yes.
So how do you capture people who make zero money out of translation interpretation? And I'm asking that because they must see themselves as professionals, otherwise they wouldn't have responded to your survey, right?
Right.
Today,
Well, a lot of them didn't even realize that they were doing something that was supposed to be paid and that they did. I mean, they didn't realize, they didn't call themselves an interpreter or translator. So when we went to the communities and we realized that these people were doing this job, we kind of said, okay, you know that what you're doing is, and what you've been doing for the last 20 years is called interpreting. And so that was one. The other ones passed the certification of the INALI, which is the National Institute of Indigenous Languages. So that's kind of how we got them, by getting to the communities and by getting all sorts of databases. Also the associations played of indigenous languages, played the advocates played a big role. I mean, they told us who was doing the interpreting, even if they didn't actually think of it as a profession.
are you going to have your deck available?
Oh, that's interesting. All the information is, all the data is open. We did 86 crossings, but we had to stop because we have to stop. There are many things that could still be done. Everything's available for whomever wants to make use of it. It's a NorthAmerica. It's there. It's in Spanish, but everything is there. Actually, there's been a couple of dissertations for students that have used this information, which makes us very happy. This is information from translators and interpreters for translators and interpreters, and that is, I think, something that was very important from the very beginning. We don't owe this study. This study belongs to the Mexican interpreters and translators, and they can do with it whatever they want to.
I was gonna say, don't forget to mention the other initiative that Gonzalo's Foundation pulled through last year, was to create a series of webinars teaching people how to give webinars. And that series, so I ran the series with them, but we had half conference interpreters and half indigenous language people who were ready to start training. And the idea was that they got trained up on how to give it effective training on a webinar platform. And those people are now every month giving out webinars, and some of them are the indigenous trainers. So it's not just trying to do the connectivity, it's also that you are working to try and increase the ability for people to train, because that's the next level of difficulty, is how do you train trainers from a pool of people who have not been formally, who may be very good interpreters and translators, but are largely self-trained, right? So but I feel like that has been a very effective model, because even though we had a lot of problems with connectivity in certain areas, we had people connecting from the indigenous regions in Mexico who were really, really passionate about wanting to get the skill set and to be training in their local communities. And they are, of course, the people who can convene their local communities to come and get trained, right? So it's a really, I mean, you're just throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall, and it's great because you're figuring out what's working, right? That's the only way to figure out what's gonna work.
But I think what I like about the e-linguist project, again, Catherine was kind enough to train the trainers on giving it a webinar. So we had a group of 10 or less students. Some of them were from indigenous languages, some were from foreign languages. They all took the course together, which is something I liked. And then every month, the first Tuesday of every month, we have a webinar, and it's given by one of those students. And we want to repeat this model over and over again. So the first few months of the year are dedicated to training trainers, and then the rest of the month they will give training. And then it's interesting because we have seen that people can enroll to one webinar or to the whole series, and we have seen that a lot of people enroll to the whole series, and a lot of conference interpreters are learning a lot from community interpreters that work in indigenous languages and vice versa. So what our vision is that we are one profession, and we have different ways of doing our job, but in the end, it's all about communication, and we should all be together in that. And it was actually in One Interpreter America that this started, because I was in Interpreter America, and there was this picture, and somebody was giving this talk about going with a medical mission to Mexico, to Chiapas. And they had borrowed, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, they had borrowed the school as one of the classrooms was the operation room. And there was somebody in the picture with a newspaper. And the person who was giving the presentation said, do you know what this person with the newspaper is doing in the picture? And then there's somebody with a body all open, blood everywhere, whatever. Probably wasn't that bad, but that's the way I remember it. And so nobody knew what the person with the newspaper was doing until we were told he's in charge of scaring the flies away while the doctors operate on this patient. And I was sitting right next to a State Department interpreter, who was a very good friend of mine. And she said, those are not the right conditions to interpret. And I said, I mean, what is wrong with us?
Yeah.
You know, what's happened to this profession when we forget what we're here to do? And we are here to help communication. So that was actually the motivation for Benoist.
So our next speaker is Kenneth Deere. He is the Secretary for Haudenosaunee Relations at the Mohawk Nation at Kahnawake. He is a lawyer, a journalist, a business owner, a leader of youth initiatives, and an activist, a worldwide and Canadian activist for the rights and status of First Nations. I'd like you to welcome Kenneth Deere.
You know, I'm glad, first I want to thank Bill for inviting me. We met at the UN in January at the launch of the Year of Indigenous Languages. And I'm glad you corrected the program and called me chief. I'm not a chief.
Sorry for the promotion.
That's all right. It's Dr. Kenneth.
Dr.
Right. And also, it's not the Kahnawake Nation, but it's I'm the secretary of the Mohawk Nation at Kahnawake. And also, I'm a member of the Haudenosaunee External Relations Committee. I do have a PowerPoint somewhere.
Yeah, that's it.
No.
Sorry. That's that other guy. So I thought what I would do, since I like to, you know, my elders always tell me this. And they always, when you're going to give a talk, they always start at the beginning. You know, where do you begin? Where do I talk about it? And I guess because some of you are not from around here, I guess I should talk to who the Mohawk are, what the Haudenosaunee is, so you get an idea. And so what you're standing on here with this building is on unceded Mohawk territory. Right? Mohawks are a people that have been here from time immemorial, and we're part of a confederacy. In English, you call it the Six Nations Confederacy. French call us the Iroquois Confederacy. We call ourselves the Haudenosaunee. The Haudenosaunee means the people of Mohawks. So this little picture up here, if you get it. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. There it is. This is the seal of the Haudenosaunee. That's the seal of our government. And our government existed from before European contact. And it's a very structured government. It's something, it was a federation of the original 5 nations, which was a strong political force and military power at the time of contact. And this symbol is very, there's so much in it. I love it. It's all about our people. And I'm going to go back to it later because there's you have to get here. I have to tell you the history until we ever get to this point, because it's important to see this works. There you go. So these are the original nations: Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca were the original 5 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. The Tuscaroras joined later on in the 1700s when they moved up from the south because of pressure from the English, and were adopted and to make us the Sixth Nation. Which way? Which way are we supposed to move? Well, okay.
The camera is out of focus, so we so the remote people cannot read the screen. So, but it's not your fault.
Good. But I'll keep continuing. I'm very good at our focus. So the Tuscaroras came up and we were similar language based, so they were included into the Confederacy. So this is our homeland in general. It's not specific. It's not, these lines are just in general. So you'll see way up on top is Montreal, where we are, the island of Montreal and Laval and stuff. You see, the Mohawk territory to the north and our homeland. I don't have that pointer. Why? Our heartland is in the Mohawk Valley here, the Mohawk River. It's connected to Albany. So we're in the United States, Ontario, and oh, you do? Oh, okay, great. Thank you. So we're up here, and then all of this here, this is all Mohawk territory, all the Adirondack Mountains. This is Lake Champlain, and this is the Mohawk Valley, which is our heartland, where we winter there mostly. We are agricultural people. We were hunter and gatherers as well, but we were agricultural people, and we were corn people. We planted corn, and we have what we call, and also other plants, what we call the three sisters: beans, corn, and squash. We grew them together, and they help us supplement each other. And all the other nations, this would be Onondagas, Oneidas here, and then the Onondagas, the Cayugas, and then the Seneca, which are probably a lot more into all the way into Pennsylvania and stuff. And of course, we were over here was mostly Huron, who were also Iroquoian speaking people, but they weren't part of the Confederacy, which was the big mistake. That's why there's no Hurons. So this is our traditional homeland, and we all spoke Iroquoian languages, but they're slightly all a little bit different. The further from the Mohawks, the further west you go, the harder it is to understand. It's harder for us to understand Seneca as we go along. We can understand Oneida pretty good, Onondaga, but then Cayuga, Seneca get tough. To say nothing of Tuscarora. So today, this is our communities that we have left. Right here, this little, that's Ganawage. That's where myself and Sonny come from. This is Ganasadage. And this is Ugly-Susne. Ugly-Susne is a Mohawk community, which is part in Canada, part in the United States, part in Ontario, part in Quebec, and part in New York State. So it's got a lot of jurisdictional issues there. Also, there's Tainanaga here. It's also a Mohawk community, and we have Ganyange is a settlement, and it's occupation actually. It's an occupation that's ongoing occupation for about almost 50 years now. Yeah, almost 50 years, right? Yeah. And there's also, we have another community back on the Mohawk River. How do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce Tom Porter's community? Yeah. It means the pot or something. And so those are the Mohawk communities. And we also there's one here called Six Nations Reserve, where all of the Six Nations are there in that territory. And over here you have I can't see it from my angle, but there's Oneidas here somewhere, and then there's the Onondagas, and then the Senecas are here. And then there's a one Tuscarora community there. And there's an Oneida community way out here in Ontario, and also there's one all the way up in Wisconsin, Green Bay, Wisconsin. And Green Bay Airport is part on the reservation, and also the Green Bay Packers Stadium, which is right next door. And that's why I'm a Green Bay Packer fan. Well, that's our territory, and the Oneidas moved up. The Oneidas moved up because of pressure on their territory. They went by boat. They went by boat all the way up, but they sailed over there. There's a whole so much history. I can't wait. We have a very, very rich history. I can't really get into it. But at the beginning, I don't know how much time you're giving me. I'm taking all of it. Kristen Carpenter, Dr. Kristen will have to wait. We were warring peoples. We were fighting with each other before we became and And it was so bad that we couldn't go out plant our crops without an armed escort. It was so bad. So the women asked the creator for some help. And so he sent us a peacemaker. And the peacemaker was actually a Huron who was born on the North Shore of Lake Ontario. And there's a whole long story about him. I'm not going to get into that. We'll be here all day. And so when he came to us and he taught us the ways of peace. And he went to the Oneidas. And he says, he taught us the ways of peace. What he was teaching us is, first of all, to have peace, you have to bury your weapons of war between each other. And you have to put aside your anger and your hatred and your thirst for revenge. You gotta put that aside. And you only got to use good words, or the words that don't cut or hurt. And then you have to use reason, rational thinking, and what we call a good mind to settle your differences, to debate and go to debate and settle your differences. Then you will have peace with one another. And the Oneidas said to him, those are very good teachings, but don't tell us that. Go see the Mohawks. They're the worst people in the world. And go teach them the way. So he did. And he came to the Mohawks, and the first thing we did was try and kill him. I mean, we couldn't kill him. He said, well, I guess we should listen to what he has to say. So he went around the Mohawks, and to make a long story short, the Mohawks accepted the ways of peace, and he went back to the Oneidas, Onondagas, Cubans, and Senecas. The ways of peace. And so that's how we became one nation. It's a long, complicated story, more than that. And so we call ourselves the Haudenosaunee, which means people of the longhouse. This is a kind of longhouse that we didn't live in teepees or we lived in longhouses. And these are the headdresses of the nations. You see Alex has 3 feathers right here. Oops. Getting ahead of myself. So this is the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga. Utica, I think that's Seneca, and that's Tuscarora. And so these are ways that we can identify ourselves. And this is the longhouse, and symbolically, this is the western, the eastern door where the Mohawks dwell, and then the Oneidas, Onondagas, and at the end is the Seneca, the western door keepers. And you'll see a map. This is of all our territories, and this is a wampum belt called the Hiawatha Belt. Yes, there was a person, real person called Hiawatha, not the one in the Longfellow poem, but it's pronounced Hiawatha in our language. And he made this map of this. He made this wampum, and to symbolize the Confederacy, what they call the first Constitution. Some people call it the first Constitution of the Confederacy. You know, the Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondagas is the shape of a tree, which means a tree of peace, and that's where we council with the capital of the Confederacy. The Cayugas and the Senecas. This was made centuries before the Tuscarora came up and joined us. So if you see that, then it matches our territory. And this is a flag. Out of that wampum belt we make, you'll see this flag in our communities and everywhere around. This represents the Haudenosaunee. All 6 nations, even though there's 5 on the flag, it's the original nation. This is not the Haudenosaunee flag. I put this up here because it's so popular. It's called the warrior flag. And it had another name. The gentleman who designed this was from my community. And he called it a unity flag. There was one person in the center. Unify everybody. The sun represents the creator, and the red the land. And that was also. So you see it everywhere. It's become a symbol of resistance. You see the pipeline demonstration there. It's gone way beyond the Haudenosaunee. It's all around the world. I use it as gifts sometimes. So we get back to here, and the reason why. So this symbolizes the Confederacy. The tree of peace represents the teachings of the peacemaker, and that if you want peace, you'll come under the tree of peace, and under that tree you'll see the weapons of war are buried underneath the tree, and that's where and there's 4 roots that go up on the tree, and those are what called the white roots of peace. That if you're looking for peace, that you would follow those roots here underneath the tree and find peace. But of course, you have to bury your weapons to do that. Around these symbols, these are the clans, the clan system, the families of the, everybody belongs to a family. And we're a matrilineal society, so it's the women that carry the clan. So over here you have the snipe clan, bear, eel, turtle, deer, beaver, hawk, heron, and wolf. And so these are, if you're a Haudenosaunee, you belong to one of those clans. Your mother is one. Among the, we don't all have all the same clans. The Mohawks have wolf, bear, and turtle clan. We have 3 clans. So you have to belong to one of those clans. And you cannot marry your same clan. All right. So if you're a turtle woman, you have to marry a bear or a wolf. But all the children will be turtle. You are who your mother is. So and also it's the women have leadership in each of their clan. We call clan mothers. They're not called chiefs, but they're called clan mothers, and it's the clan mothers that appoint the chiefs. All right. And so these 50 figures around here are the 50 chiefs of the Confederacy. 9 of them are Mohawk, 9 are Oneida. I think there are 14 that's Onondaga, 10 Seneca, I think 10 Cayuga, and 8 Seneca. It comes up to 50 anyway. And so these are the chiefs, and it's the women that appoint each chief is a title. It's not like I said, there's 9 Mohawk chiefs here, and the Turtle clan mother that holds that title. She's the one that holds the title. It's a string of wampum. That's the title. Right. And it goes like this: when there's a vacancy, she has to find somebody to replace that. And she out of all the turtle men, she chooses one. Well, actually, in tradition, they're groomed anyway. But so she chooses a man who make the best position, because the women are the ones that raise the young men, raise the children, and they know to have the right mentality to be a peace chief as opposed to being a war chief. All of these men, were all war chiefs before the peacemaker came, and he made them into peace chiefs, and their names became titles. So those titles were handed down from generation to generation at a time. So if there's a vacancy. The Turtle clan mother proposes somebody to replace that. She doesn't appoint him, but she proposes him. And if there's no objection, then he takes that position.
Is it her daughter then who becomes the next clan
It
member?
could be, but it doesn't have to be. It's not a royal family. It's what the family is responsible for the ball. So they would pick the best person to be the clan mother. And in tradition, they had a lineup of people that would be trained to do that. Because you never know, people can die, disease or whatever. So they had a bunch of people that were ready to take those positions. So and also the clan mother can remove the chief. If the chief is not doing his job, is not listening to the people. It's a democracy. We work by consensus. If he doesn't follow consensus, then the clan mother can warn him. If he continues to disobey, not listen, she warns him a second time. And if he continues to misbehave, she removes him and she goes to somebody else's place. So women are very powerful. It's matrilineal, semi-matriarchal. It's not all over the same. And so these are the 50 chiefs, and you see that they're holding hands, and it's symbolically that they're protecting the people, they're protecting everything that's inside the circle. And there's that line, this line that goes on the outside is we call it the circle. I guess the circle. When you're inside that circle, you come under the protection of the Confederacy. And on top of the tree is an eagle. The eagle is not a clan. The eagle symbolizes vigilance, so that if the eagle sees a danger to the peace, he cries out and it warns the people, and they defend the peace. And also the arms are being held together, so if should the tree ever fall, that they would catch the tree on their arms, and the chiefs would put the piece back up. So there's a lot of symbolism on that. I carry this. There's a tree of peace here that I wear. There's so much teachings in there. I can't even. It'll take me all day to go into all of them. But it's great. It's great teachings. So that's the Confederacy, all right, and the Mohawks are part of that. And this is the Constitution that we were following before the European contact, after the European contact. And this is what the Canadian American government wants to destroy. That's why they brought in the Indian Act, elected systems instead of having traditional systems. They wanted to, Christianize everybody. All of this, our ceremonies were outlawed. All kinds of stuff. They did everything they could to destroy that. Fortunately, we survived. It's because we went underground. All kinds of stuff we had to do. And there's been a revival of all of this in the last 50 years. All right. So that's why in Iroquoian communities on both sides of the border, there are two kinds of governments. You have our traditional government with chiefs, grandmothers, and you have the imposed elected governments, by the Canadian American governments. And we're like this. The government gives all the money to the elected. So, but it's our side that keeps the language, the culture. And all that. Now, this what's an important part here I want to emphasize is that this is what's called a Turo. The Turo represents our relationship with other countries, other nations. And I'll symbolize this with the treaty. Our first treaty that we made wasn't with the French or the English, it was with the Dutch, because the Dutch came up the Hudson. So at the Treaty of Fort Orange, for instance. So this is a wampum that represents our relationship with the Dutch. So we have one row here, represents the purple row represents the Dutch in their ship with sails, with their people, their governance, their laws, their religion in that ship. And the other purple row represents our canoe, with our people, with our laws, our spirituality. And the white in the background represents the river of life. And so the ship with sails and the canoe will go down the river of life, not interfering with each other. And that was the symbolic relationship that we have with the Dutch. But we figured the Dutch ain't going back to Europe, so we got to figure out a way to live with each other, to coexist. And it was a way of us recognizing the Dutch's right to self-determination and the Dutch's respect for our right to self-determination. All right, so we would follow each other. And the Treaty of Fort Orange was in 1635. So it shows you the wisdom of our people. We weren't dummies. When you have university people can't figure this out today. States can't figure this out. And so the two this kind of relationship is how we see our view with all other foreign nations. So we have this relationship with Great Britain, with France, with when the United States separated, with the United States, when Canada separated, with Canada, and if Quebec ever separates, this will be our relationship with Quebec. And you see the lines are there's no end to it. You think all this the strings at the end means it goes on forever. So that's our relationship. So we don't see ourselves as Canadian citizens or American citizens. We see ourselves as Haudenosaunee, in our case, Mohawks, the Mohawk Nation. So we don't see, we're very nationalistic in that way. And that's how we, so that's how we coexist. All right. Just a little side note here. When the American 13 colonies separated, they were squabbling with one another, fighting with each other. And Benjamin Franklin said something like, how come the 13 civilized colonies can't get along, and those 6 savage nations can get along? So why can't we get along? So they looked to the Confederacy for guidance on writing their Constitution, because the 13 colonies only knew royalty. They only knew kings and queens. They didn't know another way of governing themselves. So we taught them our way of reaching consensus, working together, because you'll see the 50 chiefs are all equal. They're all equal. There's no big chief. There's no king. And also one of the things they didn't listen to was the power and the role of the women, because the women had no voice in the American Constitution. They listened to that part. We take no responsibility. So we've gotten credit for that. You'll see the first term. The first word is, it comes to is we the peoples. This is where it comes from. Because in the Europeans, the minds of the Europeans, sovereignty was held in the crown. In our way, the people are sovereign. And they just lend that sovereignty to the chief. So this is the concept comes from here. Also comes from the Jesuit writings and Rousseau, who were reading the Jesuit writings. They try to blame the French for all this stuff. The French got it from us for the readings of the Jesuit writings. So, back to reality today. This is Ganawage. This is my community. It's only 20 minutes from here. Oops. And this is the wrong button. You know, so my house is right around here somewhere. Where am I? Right around there. And this is the Mercier Bridge. This is a train bridge. This big ditch is the St. Lawrence Seaway. And when it was put in here in the 1950s, which was very destructive to us, it separated us from the river, because we're river people. Most indigenous people, all are indigenous are river people. So this is my my community. Now, and this is the part of the island of Montreal. We're up here somewhere. So this is a map of that. The reason for this is my community. This is we're right around here where it says 138. That's where we are right now, around there somewhere. And these are the lines of our community today. Ganawage Indian Reserve number 14. I think we're 14. Yeah. And you know, we're surrounded by all these other communities. But this is what it's supposed to be. All this yellow part is supposed to be Ganawage. But all this land here and all this land, you know, was taken away from us, sold out from under us by Indian agents and priests, you know, sell to their family. Because remember, we were agricultural people, so we would clear the land, plant corn, and when the land started to not reproduce, we would clear other land and move to other places. So the priests or the Indian agent would move their family onto the land that we had cleared and start plowing that up. So over the years, we lost all this. But also, this part's in dispute. We say this is supposed to be ours too. But anyway, this is big enough. So the government admits that that land was illegally taken away from them. That it should be all be Ganawage. But they only want to give us money. They don't want to give us the land back. It's okay to move in indigenous people off the land, but we don't want to move white people off. So we're at a stalemate with the government. We don't want money. We want land. Because you can spend money, you can't spend land. All right. I don't know if I want to go any much further with this. This is Aguizasne. This is this is in Ontario. This is in Quebec. This is in New York State. This is all one Mohawk community. It's a mess. Same thing here. Six Nations Reserve. After the War of Independence, the United States, the Mohawks, some of the people fought for the British, and when the British lost, they gave all of this land, 6 miles on each side of the Grand River in Ontario, that empties into Lake Erie, to the Haudenosaunee. And the same thing that happened there, all that's left is this part. All the rest of the other land was sold out from under us. And there's no accounting for that land, for that money. The Canadian government used that money to build a canal near Brantford. They bailed out McGill University in the 1880s. They loaned the money to McGill. McGill says they paid it back. Oh, I don't know. I have to see the books first. And they also the money they used funded Canada's expeditionary force in World War I. There's still no accounting for it. This must be worth billions. Anyway, I don't know. I want to go into all that other stuff. By the way, remember you said that that other lady said about passports? Yeah. Well, we have our own passport. Haudenosaunee, because we don't consider ourselves Canadian American citizens, we use our own passport.
Is it recognized at the border?
I've been traveling on it for 33 years. I've been to 22 countries, and COP25 was moved to Spain from Chile, so I'm going to Spain in a couple of weeks, and then Ecuador in January. But anyway, that's not the point. The point of the matter is that a passport for us is a proof of identity. It's a non-violent, nice way of asserting ourselves and who we are. And if a country doesn't let us in on our passport, then we don't go. It's their loss. So we continue to assert our identity this way. Now, as Canadians or Americans, don't be insulted. You know, we think that your Canadians are fine people, and you can have your own passport too. But, no, we don't have ours. We're just a different people. It's all there is, nothing bad about that. And I also wrote ID cards too. These are, this is just a mock-up, it's not a real one. It's not a Mohawk. So, I don't know what names you use. So I think it's a staff member from the company. I don't know what else I can tell you about this. I don't want to go too far. I just want to say that this guy here, this guy here, went to the League of Nations in 1923 and 24 to complain to the government about all that land they took out of 6 nations in Ontario. And he went to the League of Nations, and the League of Nations refused to register because it's not a member. You'll see that they have a two-row here and a friendship belt. Here's some holding a piece of it. But that's another story. But what it does do, though, I want to show you, is a lot of interpretation. These are beautiful stories, by the way. This is the United Nations. This is room 17. This is where the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was drafted. This has to be either 95 or 96. I don't know. I think it's 95. And where I think it was drafted. And one of the things that we did as Indigenous people is that we have an Indigenous caucus. When we were fighting at the United Nations for our rights as Indigenous people from all over the world, and we all spoke different languages. We had people from North America speaking English, people from Latin America speaking Spanish, and we had people from Africa speaking French, and we had people in Quebec speaking French. We had, and then later on we had people from Siberia speaking Russian. But in the beginning, it was mostly English-speaking Indigenous people from North America and Australia, New Zealand, and Latin America, and Spanish-speaking from Latin America. That were the two big blocks of people in negotiation. And so we were wondering, how do we get along? And we, one of the things that solidarity is that we were all oppressed, we were all dispossessed, we were all victims of genocide. So we had a lot of solidarity in the area. So we had something very common so that we could play. And so we were so we would get together and meet, and we had a strategy that all Indigenous people would all meet together, and we would make decisions before we stepped into the room of the states together, and we work by consensus. And so we would meet like this. And then you can't see, I chair these meetings. That's my PAX act. That's my chair. This is a guy, I think he's from Ecuador. Was my co-chair. Anyway, so we're talking, and we had no money. This is the World Council of Churches building in Geneva. That's their conference. And so so we're talking and we're working together, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong, and then the English-speaking people are going this way, and the Spanish people are going this way, and then we're wondering what's going on, and then the English-speaking people we're wondering what the heck is going to happen with Spanish-speaking people. Spanish-speaking Indigenous people were regarding the English the suspect that were stabbing them in the back. And we were, what's going on? And then people who could understand both English and Spanish figured out that our interpreters, were volunteers, really nice people, but they were not interpreting correctly. And then so there was misunderstandings. So our friends in Europe, our support groups in Europe, they got some money the next year, and then they started hiring professional interpreters. And then that solved a lot of, could have been fatal to our movement. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for you as interpreters. You have my absolute respect for the work that you do, because I think you contribute to world peace. And this day we could have had war here. So I have absolutely respect. I wanted to say that. How much more time? I got some more time. So we work together. I wanted to also, this is the Indigenous Caucus in New York. And Art Manuel that I think you've passed on now. Also, Tanya Fisher. There's a couple of people here who were, I think that's Art Manuel. And I think that's Tanya Fisher.
Yeah.
Leadership in our people who have passed in the last few years.
And his daughter still, I think she's being held right now,
Yeah,
detained by the Canadian government due to the pipeline
okay.
as we speak.
And I wanted to, oops, I don't think I have this. I wanted to show you this part here. Bill saw this at the General Assembly. We, about getting indigenous people to speak in their language. And it was a battle. It doesn't happen easily. In Geneva, this sort of fight took place where when we were meeting with on the declaration or a meeting on the just a general meeting, we inch by inch we tried to get more and more indigenous language and culture into the room. So one of the things that we do, like the talk that Alex Bible gave, we do traditional openings, opening addresses. It's not a prayer. It's an opening address, and so we have to fight with what we like to get it in. So it took a long time. So now, in the General Assembly, when we have a permanent forum on indigenous issues or the launch of the year, the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, it's custom now that we have an Indigenous opening. And in New York, it's in the hands of Haudenosaunee and the Onondaga chief title of Piscataway, not Piscataway, Onondaga. Onondaga chief does the opening. He does it in the Onondaga language. And then upstairs in the interpretation booths, we have an Onondaga that interprets for them, one and two. I have a little funny story. Usually, he does the traditional opening all in the language. He doesn't speak English at all, just in the language. It's interpreted in the English booth into English, and all the other languages that pick it up. So it goes into Russian, Spanish, etc. There was an event called the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, a high-level plenary session of the United Nations in New York. And Onondaga was going to do the opening, but then his interpreter didn't show up. Something happened at home. Somebody got sick. Somebody, family member got sick, so couldn't come. So they had nobody. So they asked me to do it. I said, what? I said, first of all, I don't speak Onondaga. I don't even speak Mohawk. And so they printed out the address in Onondaga. And they gave it to me, and the security brought me up to the booth. And I looked at this and the thing, and it's a literal translation, literal. So it reads like something like feathered. Our bird friends are, which we give, which thanks we give for. It's instead of saying we give thanks to our feathered friends, it's all convoluted like that. So here I am, I'm writing it down. I'm trying to correct the English, and then the guy next to me says, "You're on." And then he's already started talking in Onondaga. So I started reading it. So then we're really good at first until I got to the part where I didn't translate. And then so I was in my mind, I was flipping the words around. And when you're doing when he does the talk, there's a break. It's called, and for this we give thanks. There's a certain phrase that breaks into sections. Anyway, I missed one of them. And then so by the time I finished my interpretation, he was still talking. And it's there for record. If you ever look on my website, the webinar, I looked at the World Council of Indigenous Peoples in 2014 in September. It's still there. If you put on the English thing, you'll hear my voice, and you'll see that I finished about 10 or 15 seconds. I was misty. I was citing. Anyway, I just want to talk about Mohawk language now in my community. And I'm a victim of Canadian policy. I don't speak the language. I was not allowed to speak my language in school. We learned nothing about my culture or anything in school about all the stuff I taught you, about the tree of trees and all that. I had to learn that as an adult. My parents, for some reason, were also convinced by the church or whoever not to talk to me more. They spoke to each other, they're fluent speakers to each other, but they didn't speak to me. I wish they were disobedient and would insist that they didn't. That's the only thing I regret from my parents. And I regret myself. I should have been a bad kid and learned the language, instead of being such a good Catholic at the time. But our community still did a lot, was one of the leading communities in language in our community. In the 67, 68, we had housewives go into our school and teaching Mohawk 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day, making up their own curriculum, whatever it was. And then you grew to 20 minutes and it grew to half an hour over the years. And this was in violation of what the government wanted. The government policy to assimilate education was still in place at that time. The last one was 1958, and so it was still in place. It wasn't replaced until 73. And so we started teaching our language stronger, and then we tried. They were paid like $20 a week. And then so it just grew and grew, and then we started introducing to it. We started taking control. We have a lot of native staff in the schools, so we put in more and more language, half an hour a day, and then we realized that the language once a day is not going to save the language. It's good for maintenance program, but if you don't speak the language, it's not going to save the language. So we concluded that you needed Mohawk immersion. So in 1980, we started a Mohawk immersion at nursery level. In 1980s, 81 went to kindergarten, 82 grade 1, and onwards. That's what it is today. As a matter of fact, we're overhauling that. We're really putting in more Mohawk. And then we also now have, since 2002, we have adult immersion programs for our cultural center. At first, it was a 1-year program, for 5 days a week, all in Mohawk. If you have some Mohawk. Now after we taught everybody in that category that now we take in people who have no Mohawk speaking background, and we have a 2-year immersion program for adults. But that be a total commitment by other people. So now we're developing adult speakers, and a lot of those people are now becoming our teachers at school. My wife, thank God, was a Mohawk speaker, and she's a Mohawk. One of the reasons why she's a Mohawk speaker is that she quit school, at grade 6 or grade 7, because she had to stay home and take care of her mother. Her mother was sadly rheumatoid arthritis, had to take care of her mother. So, and a lot of people who quit school in those years became teachers later on in the future because their language was so good. So my children speak the language. My grandchildren speak the language, and I got to talk to my dog in the language. Me, I got a hard day. So, and my grandson teaches grade 3 in Mohawk English. So we're trying to keep the language alive. I'm my wife's worst student. but I blame the government. I don't also, the same thing goes for Spanish or French. I failed French twice in I never officially graduated from high school because I failed French twice. And then I haven't picked up Spanish. My Spanish speaking friends from Latin America, indigenous people who I've known for a couple of decades, they couldn't speak English. Now they speak English and I don't speak Spanish. So they're on my case. But that's just the way it is. But I don't know. I know I didn't talk a lot about interpretation. I just want to show my respect for you. That's it for now. Any questions?
So I think the Hurons are so interesting. So that peacemaker you talked about was a Huron, right? But the Hurons didn't join the Six Nations. Why is that?
The Hurons were numerous. They were more numerous than we are. The Mohawks, we were one of the least numerous, but we were one of the fiercest. But the Hurons didn't think they needed us. They were numerous. They were big. The rest of us felt that we needed each other's protection. So the Hurons didn't join us. And unfortunately, during the European contact, there was a big fight over the fur trade, and the Hurons sided with the French against they wanted to, because we were controlling the fur trade. They didn't like that, so the French got the Hurons to ally with them, and they promised that we will smash the Iroquois, and then they will control the fur trade. Okay. It was their mistake because we put 5,000 troops on the field. We burned the French forts all the way from Detroit, all the way up we laid siege to Montreal and Quebec City. We just weakened the French so much that the English were able to defeat them in 1765. That's when the English took over the rest of the
How do you feel about voting in Canada?
You don't.
You know,
You don't vote. The Hautestories in particular, we have this attitude, like the two wrote that, we don't want to interfere with who steers your ship. We don't want you telling us who steers our canoe. We're not going to tell you how to steer your ships. So we don't vote in Canadian elections, Quebec elections, and those of us of tradition, we don't vote even in the local land council elections. I haven't explained the Indian Act to you, but the Indian Act imposed elected systems in our country. For instance, in Six Nations, you took it down, the Six Nations was run by a traditional council with all those chiefs and clan mothers. And they're the ones that sent Tiscahit to the League of Nations because we were sovereign. We weren't Canadians. And so when Canada saw this guy, this chief show up in the League of Nations, they were livid. They were pissed, and we had support from Japan, the Netherlands, because we had the tour with them, and I think Persia, which is today, they supported Tiscahit to speak at the League of Nations. Canada was just a minor power at the time, so they asked Great Britain for help. So Great Britain convinced the League not to allow them to speak at the League of Nations. But Tiscahit never returned home. And back in Canada, Canada was so upset that they invaded, RCMP invaded Six Nations Reserve. They went to the council house. They took all our wampums and files and symbols of authority, shipped it off to Ottawa, padlocked the council house, and had elections under the Indian Act. It was 1924, not that long ago. I'm sorry, years, but it was in the last century. We're not talking about the 1800s. We're talking about 1924. So now in Six Nations in particular, so they have this elected council, which the government supports, and then you have the traditional chiefs and clan mothers. Now the government gives all the money to the elected council. In their elections, you get about 4 or 5% of all people who can vote in those elections. 5%, but yet they fund the government. And the same thing in my community, we have our traditional council, which I'm part of, and we have elected council, and you get about 20 to 25% of people voting in that, because they don't recognize those imposed systems. So to that extent, and of course, we don't vote in Canadian elections.
One last question. How do you feel about the effort that Canada is doing right now to put Indigenous languages in Parliament?
Well, I support their efforts, of course, anything they can do to help our languages. We're always, of course, Canada doesn't, although it supports our languages, they have a new Languages Act, but we know right away by looking at the numbers that there's not enough money there to save our languages. So we'll always be pushing Canada harder for that. And we want to control those policies and implementation of language education, not the government, as long as we have control. Because we're the ones that saved the language, it wasn't them. So, and the same thing with any other thing. All these, I think we're Indigenous people in Canada are better off under the Liberal government than under the Conservative, which were Conservatives were hostile, absolutely hostile to Indigenous rights. But still, the architecture, the bureaucracy inside the Canadian government is still assimilationist in nature, and that the ultimate goal of both governments, whether it's liberal or conservative, is the eventual assimilation of Indigenous peoples. They just put a nicer word on it. But if you follow you connect all the dots, you look at the policies down to the end. That's the ultimate goal of Canadian government to release all responsibilities to Indigenous people, to make us municipal governments, which we don't accept. There's lots of conflict in the future between us, because we are not going to assimilate. Better get used to it. Yes, sir.
What do you think of universities starting courses in indigenous languages? Like I think University of Toronto have courses in Mohawk. In University of Montreal there is classes in Kinu. What do you think? Usually that class is with non-indigenous people.
Yeah.
How do you think?
As a rights person, I understand that people have a right to learn whatever they can. I'll tell you what my wife thinks. And she says, you have no business learning our Mohawk language. And that language belongs to our people, and it should only be our people that should be learning it. If all of our people knew the language, then fine, maybe you can learn. But we should be learning it first. All Mohawks should speak the language before non-natives start learning it. That's what my wife is saying. And I have to live with it.
Well, on that, I think most of us agree with your wife as Native people, because in the case of Mexico, if a lighter Mexican learns their language, again, me as, let's say somebody learns perfect Zapoteco, they will get the jobs, they will become the interpreters, they will be representing indigenous peoples in these forums, right? So it's great that they're learning and they could be great allies on, I think I already explained how you could become an ally. But once they learn it too, it's a plus to their curriculum. And they will be in these forums. They will be developing stuff for us without taking in account of how we grew up with the language, how you are born with this language, with this culture, with this tradition, with this food, with this world vision. So it really puts us again at a disadvantage. I think in my behalf, I'm glad that they learn it, but also take a step back when it comes to indigenous people representing themselves.
Also, in our case, because we were surrounded by the police and the Canadian Army during the Oprah crisis in 1990, we are very suspicious of why non-natives want to learn our language, because we can communicate with each other in Mohawk, and soldiers don't know what we're saying. So we don't like it shouldn't ever happen again. We'll have to start using our language in WhatsApp. We have to encrypt our Mohawk language. Any other questions? I hope I wasn't too far off the top.
No, I think it's fantastic.
Well, thank you very much.